I'll bring David up on the stage now, just working out how to do it. I think, David, you need to request. You need to put your hand up and request to join, I believe. There we go. I need to accept it. Cool.
Hey, can you hear me?
I can. How's it going, bro?
Great. Yeah, I'm very good, thank you. Yeah. Pleasure to actually connect in with you in person for the first time, and everybody else who's on here as well. I'm delighted to spend a bit of time with you guys talking through everything we're doing. You have to forgive me because I didn't even know whatever these rumors are until it was brought to my attention this morning. So I don't actually know what's been going on or what anybody's necessarily been saying until I've seen a document with some things questioning what some of the clients are. So for me, I'm playing somewhat catch up in that regard, but it's mostly because we're just super focused on go live with a load of other clients and on the general build and run of the company. So yeah, I'm happy to field any and all questions in real time. So if anybody has any that they want to put through Miles, then very happy to field those as well. But yeah, Miles, maybe as well, you could distill some of the more, I guess, tangible questions from the various things that have been submitted as well, because I did see one individual, he sent quite a large document and there was just a lot of commentary within that rather than specific questions. So it's somewhat hard for me to necessarily answer those beyond going into the entire document and reading it back out for everyone. So if you want to distill out anything there, then I'm also happy to field those as well. But maybe by way of just introduction, I'll just give you a little bit of a background on myself and the company and basically our story and journey as to how we got here, just because I'm assuming there's going to be a lot of people who have seen your videos and your call related to CHEX itself, but probably don't necessarily know a great deal necessarily about the specifics or the history of the company or what we are. So if that works for you, I'll happily give a quick intro on that side of things.
Yeah, that would be very, very nice. I wish we had the AMA under different circumstances.
Don't worry.
I guess we could do
this
something
is not my first
time.
rodeo with regards to people wanting answers about various things either. So I'm absolutely fine with it. So do not worry at all. Yeah, no, I mean, so in terms of my background, for those not familiar, I actually kicked off my career out of uni in 2001 when I joined. Firstly, it was Anderson Consulting, who became Accenture. Horrible place. Learned a lot about places I didn't want to work from that. Then I went into securities lending at Merrill Lynch. This is mostly in London, and I did several years there working on the trading desks. Really got my hands on a variety of trading systems, as well as the actual trading strategies that were being employed. Then I moved into derivatives, and I went all in with Credit Suisse on collateralized debt obligations and all the juicy stuff that turned out to actually implode the entire system. Not that we knew it at the time. A bit like with DeFi, where we had some great ideas in the last cycle. We were taking all these cool products, we were taking collateral, we were recollateralizing it and using it on all sorts of things. And as we discovered, it led to a giant house of cards that largely imploded later on when the deleveraging took place. Well, that journey was something that the financial system itself did with derivatives before the 2008-9 crash. So anyway, I then moved across to Goldman Sachs in 2008. So I was actually there during The Big Short, if you guys have seen that movie. And that was my transformative moment in my career, because I'd spent my 20s basically thinking I worked for this super creative industry that was enriching the world, and I discovered actually that we were, it's the Nazi meme, are we the baddies, right? And then I suddenly realized actually this system that I had thought worked really well, and I was just too dumb to understand these products and how they necessarily fully worked. It didn't make sense to me, but smarter people out there, it does. I was able to suddenly realize, no, I've actually really got to reassess the industry I'm working within, And that led me to make a decision in about 2012. I wanted out of finance, and I was not going to spend the rest of my career, basically waiting for a fat pension and so on and so forth. So I actually got my MBA in practical terms by deciding to set up a business with my wife, and we scaled it up in food retail. It took about 5 or 6 years to scale it up to over $1 million in revenue. Might not sound a lot, but actually that's very hard to do in food retail, multi-sites and so on, and managing staff, cash flow, raising investments. It was a very tough business because it doesn't scale well at all. It requires a lot of capital. The margins are extremely fine. It's highly competitive. Horrible business actually to go into with hindsight, but this is part of the life journey. But for me, I had actually always wanted to go and set up a fintech company. And so around the time we exited that at the start of 2016 was when I was going in all in on crypto. And I was attending various, Ethereum seminars, really understanding smart contracts. And I could instantly see the potential of building full on-chain trading systems that could use blockchain at the center of the trade lifecycle. So that was the very earliest kind of nugget of what Chintai as a company is now. As to where it comes from was that I wanted to build out a high performance trading system, and I realized that Ethereum was wholly unsuited because it didn't scale. It was very expensive to use. It didn't scale, and it had all sorts of performance issues, but especially back in sort of 2016, 17, it was very new. So that is then how I got involved in the largest ICO that ever took place, which, this could be a trivia quiz for those who are not maybe on multi-cycle like Miles and myself. The largest ever ICO was actually not the Telegram Open Network. It was actually EOS. EOS managed to raise $4.3 billion, and they managed to also, fun fact, sign a deal with the SEC before they went off fining everybody else, and got it registered as a non-security, and they got a $15 million fine. So they did rather well with regards to how they did this. But the history of that is interesting and something to note so you understand why I went in on this, is that EOS was not just some random project or technology. It actually was Dan Larimer, his third iteration of a blockchain engine called Graphene, which he had built for BitShares, which is the first ever decentralized exchange, a trading exchange, and then Steem. For those who are not familiar, Steemit was the first ever decentralized tokenized social media platform, and both of them actually gained by crypto standards a lot of traction. So that's kind of the history of why EOS got as big as it did. It was built on that reputation that this guy could deliver. Now, I won't go into the history of EOS. I think everyone kind of knows it was contentious. It didn't work out as planned on a variety of levels, but I actually went all in to help launch that network, and we became elected as a validator. And I used those funds to bootstrap an initial team to build that on-chain order management system that I wanted to. And that was to lease network capacity around and provide yield to the token holders. So pre-DeFi, before anybody even used the term DeFi, we built a yield-bearing product via effectively a leasing exchange, a token leasing exchange. This is in 2018, around about August when we launched in the space of about 4 months. And that was transformative. We did thousands of transactions per second. We did $250 million of trade volume. We were overwhelmed in those early days. And at the same time, though, the entire tokenomic model changed on the network and we became obsolete in the space of about 2 weeks. So classic crypto, you spend all this time building something and then before you know it, you're obsolete. But what we had done and proven at that point was that the on-chain order management system itself worked well. It could handle very complex behaviors. It could handle multi-stage custody and all sorts of other things. And we realized at that point as well that we were going to launch our own token because we could see the potential to actually do this on a network that could handle other assets, not just, EOS, but actually it could handle any token for any asset class. And so even at these very, very early stages, this is late 2018, early 2019, the first pieces of what Chintai as a network is now were coming together. We then did a very controlled distribution of the CHEX token. We distributed initially 60% of the supply, 600 million tokens as it was, a full billion at the time. That was basically distributed with zero marketing. We excluded US, China, mandatory KYC. And as I was not entirely surprised by, secondary markets popped up within about a couple of weeks, which was neither here nor there to us as we didn't launch them ourselves. And that basically then ran in parallel with a Dutch auction that we built all the infrastructure to carry out. So every 18 hours, to enable time zones to not favour one region, there would be a cycling, and I think something like 6 million tokens were being distributed every 18 hours. I can't remember. It's something like that. It's a long time ago now. And so that was extremely successful. It achieved the aim of what we wanted to do, which was to fairly organically and evenly distribute the token. So if you look at our price chart, why it's so different from everybody else's is that we had this organic distribution over a multi-year period. So the token has now reached over 5 years in full distribution. So we're actually past the statute of limitations regarding that as well. But in terms of why, therefore, you see a price chart that looks generally so, I guess, so upward over that time is because it was priced so cheaply by the market on the issuance side. It wasn't designed for us to hype and pump it, put out false promises, dump it on the market, the classic crypto way. We were distributing, looking for an organic community that we could then grow with us as we started to then build on the original concepts. And so to touch on, I think, a couple of things to do with this thing Mint that's been mentioned as if it was a token. We had many people coming to us during that period saying, we want to issue a token. We've seen what you've done. Can we borrow this infrastructure and basically do it ourselves and we'll pay you? And we went, no, because we didn't think about that when we built it. We did it for the CHEX token and it's completely bespoke. And then they also were asking questions like, can you launch a secondary market for us? And again, we thought, well, we've got an on-chain engine, but it's very crude and it was built for this one specific use case. And so for me, certainly, it was a very easy point that then at the start of 2019 to look ahead and realize where this is headed is that there's shared needs across many asset classes for different forms of issuance, different forms of secondary, being able to source liquidity dynamically, and we're going to need, because I come from a background, the back end of my career was in risk and compliance. Unfortunately, I did 3 years at HSBC Global Asset Management right up until I left finance. Incredibly tedious, but also made me realize that this was not going to be some optional extra. So the licensing side of all of this, therefore, was something we prioritized very early. And so despite being a Brit, I made the decision very early on that I was not going to look at London. I didn't think that it was serious about digital assets. We rolled out, obviously, the US because it was a shit show with regards to the general hostility towards everybody there. So it really left Asia. And at the time, the Chinese were flip-flopping with Hong Kong and where it really stood. So Singapore was hands down my choice. And obviously, we then managed, after a multi-year journey, to attain 2 of the hardest licenses to get. The capital market service license is difficult, but it enables basically issuance of security tokens and all asset classes. But the recognized market operator license is a full exchange license. And so with it comes all of the regulatory standards and restrictions that apply to an investment bank. So to give you a context. So Chintai's code base is audited external, internal penetration testing multiple times a year as an audit and a regulatory requirement, just to give you a sense of kind of that. And as I think I mentioned on the Discord, I'm on the financial register as a rep for the company with the Monetary Authority of Singapore. So I guess that's partly why I'm fairly relaxed when people tend to post theses that we're full of shit and that things are not real or whatever, because we're so self-evidently I hate the term, but they talk about us being a docs team. Well, yeah, I mean, I've got multi-decades of experience. I think my record largely speaks for itself in that regard. So I understand people need to do due diligence and they're rightly, are applying a critical eye. But at the same time, I don't tend to take these types of things seriously unless it's basically brought to my attention, like it was this morning, that, hey, just so you know, things are getting interesting on this Discord server. Maybe you want to come along and just reassure people. So that's sort of why I think somebody asked a question, effectively, why did you not take it seriously sooner? Well, the answer was I saw some random account with 14 followers on X post some stuff and thought, this is a load of old bollocks, quite honestly, a lot of it. And obviously I know that because I'm very close to all the details, but I wasn't going to engage a 14 follower account and waste my time on that. But obviously, as it's gained more traction now, I'm happy to deep dive in. But that's a lot of the initial history of the company. And to the point then on the product itself, during that phase, we were playing around with everything from the model to the commercial modeling to branding and everything else. So we early on identified that there might be interest from clients to only use certain components of what we were building. So we thought makes sense in that case we brand these things up as almost separate products within a wider suite. So we called the compliance module Sentinel. And we called the initial issuance side of it the platform Mint, because it was going to stand for My Network Token, if you're curious where that came from. But then we realized actually we didn't need to do any of that in terms of the clients didn't give a shit about the branding. What they all wanted to actually do, almost without exception, was to white label the product and actually use it themselves. And the moment we started even proposing that, it was like it ignited the interest from everybody, because up until then, all these other kinds of solutions like ADDX, if anybody's familiar with that in Singapore, they're basically trying to become the eBay of digital assets. So you've got to list with us, you become dependent on us, all the investors on board and become kind of owned by us. And so from there, basically, we own your asses further down the line, and we can, further down the line, we get to charge whatever we like. Now, generally, companies, particularly in finance, are very aware of this model because they've been absolutely screwed over by Bloomberg, for example, for the last 25, 30 years. And the SWIFT network is another great example of this, where once you're in on it, they can completely screw you over, and it's very hard to bypass it, and you become a dependent. So that's one of the reasons you're seeing so many of the banks looking to own the internal industry solutions for this stuff, for RWA tokenization. They're doing it because they don't want to become dependent on an external provider, which is why generally it's very challenging to just sit there and say, hey, come and use our solution, move all your things onto it, trust me, bro, I promise we won't screw you over later. And that has been one of the overwhelming feedbacks from all the different clients of varying sizes that we've engaged to date, is that they love the commercial model that we've got, because it's more analogous to Shopify with regards to what it is. Shopify, if you think about it, stopped everybody having to build e-commerce infrastructure over and over and over again. And instead, if you ask who is Shopify's primary client base that makes them billions of dollars a year, it is small and medium-sized businesses. It's not the global Amazons. Of course, they do all that stuff themselves, right? They want that competitive edge, and they have the economies of scale to do this. But for the vast majority of actual vendors globally online, they can't afford to do that. They're looking for solutions. Well, the same really applies for RWA here. You're going to have Goldman, for example, building their own stuff in-house. And I know that because I worked on, obviously, a lot of their systems. They always build in-house. So I'm probably the least surprised to see they've not used a solution like, I don't know, Securitize, and they've got something developed in-house for an RWA tokenization market. Of course, they want to own it. That's how they operate. And they've got the economies of scale to build something, but their focus is absolutely 100% on the institutional side. That's going to be on the multi-billion-dollar bank-to-bank major institutions, basically their bread and butter right now that they own in conventional terms. That's where they're really focused right now. Whereas if you look at what we are doing, it's very, very different. We are opening the doors to companies from startups up to, multi-billion-dollar asset managers are still deemed tiny in the wider market, to be able to pick this technology up and actually execute on their business strategies. And that's what you're seeing with the first tranche of issues we've announced over the last sort of 6 weeks or so, from KingCap through to, I think was the last one, Real NOI, for example. These are all companies of a variety of sizes and stages. But yeah, I think one of the questions that came was, some of them don't look that impressive from the websites, or they don't look that big. Well, yeah, there's a variety of reasons to that. In some cases, it's because they are pre-launch, so the websites are not intended for clients to be looking at them and judging them that way. And in other cases, they are smaller companies like GreenMX, where they own a VCC and they've done a number of smaller issuances, but they are generally a smaller client, right? So the type of issuance sizes are reflected. They're sort of 5 to 10 million, not 50 million, 200 million, etc. And that's quite a defined strategy for us right now, because we are finding that it is far easier to get traction with companies under 1 billion issuance size than we are trying to compete and muscle in with some of the largest banks in the world, for example, and say, yes, we're going to compete with them. If you're realistic, crypto and the distribution can't fully service RWA properly yet. So we're generally get cases like hopefully that's just like a useful intro in my own words, so you just get to know a bit about me and the company. But yeah, I can field specifics on any and all of the clients. You'll have to forgive me in certain cases if I don't go into too much detail where I think maybe the client doesn't want to announce something. And I have got a hard stop in 35 minutes because we've got a major partner meeting that I'm going to be attending as well.
Thanks for that, David. Just letting you know that at times your internet cut out just at the end part for the beginning it was fine. Just in the last minute it started cutting. I don't know if you walked into some room or
my side I couldn't tell, so apologies. Yeah, if there's something you didn't hear and want me to repeat, then do just ask away.
I think it was just during the wrap up, so I don't think it was anything too important. But no, I really appreciate that. I think that gives people good context.
Yeah, I think context is important because a lot of people don't understand how long we've been around and what the drivers are behind what we're trying to do. You know, when we are not trying to, for example, just tokenize things like treasuries. It's not because I'm knocking treasuries. It doesn't particularly excite me as a use case for any of this stuff. So where
I guess it's much harder. One of the criticisms has been, look, it's much harder to tokenize real estate and art and other, forms of asset classes as opposed to treasuries or credit, like Clearpool's doing or like Ondo's doing.
Yeah, and you're not wrong.
It's more difficult.
It is, and it's a bit like as well. If you look at some of the earliest iterations of RWA tokenization, like some of the early securitized stuff on Ethereum, they weren't moving the whole trade life cycle on chain at all. And the reason for that is because doing that's really hard. To be able to handle every facet of that is very hard to do. And, in our case, we architected it from the ground up from inception to do it. But I can tell you the build for something that complicated is substantial. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. Other asset classes are going to be naturally easier. So, for example, securities that are highly liquid and listed already would be very easy to. Well, we saw it in the DeFi era. You guys remember the Mirror protocol on Terra, and actually we had stock tokens briefly on Binance before they got taken down. Same principle, very easy to basically. I mean, I'll give you an example of something we could do if we were really interested in pumping and dumping. We could basically get one of our network to buy $200 million worth of a BlackRock fund now. We would tokenize it, one-to-one, represent it on the network, put it up for sale, and put out a press release saying $200 million BlackRock fund issued on Chintai. It's that easy for us to do that if we wanted. But we're not. We're doing real client-driven stuff because I don't think there's demand from clients to buy BlackRock funds that are already available elsewhere, necessarily, at least at this stage, in that way. I would rather it was driven by real commercials and clients. And I know we haven't even touched on the commercial model yet, but just to give you a sense of, therefore, why we're letting the clients to some degree lead our focus, whether it's tokenized fine art, whether it's carbon, whether it's real estate, etc. We're finding those are the types of things that are there's most demand for, at least at this stage.
I think we can go into some of the individual questions, and then at the end, if we still have, because I'm cognizant of time, we can go. We can circle back and. I could probably speak to you for hours because there's so many questions I have on the commercials.
On another one, anytime, just let me know. I'm happy to. And now I'm on this, and if you ever want me to pull on a different one, I'm always happy to field some questions, even if it's just more generally around RWA as well.
Yeah, I think that could actually be interesting for some YouTube content in the future because I cover RWA a lot, and obviously you're
Yeah. No, by all means.
one of
By
the
all means.
leaders there, so that could be really interesting for the public platforms too.
Sure.
But
So
yeah,
go ahead in terms of
I'll
questions.
just go through individually, and I understand what you said about specifics on every project, but I'll kind of ask the broader questions. And a lot of this has come to light from a guy called Legend. Look, he's been a member of the Discord for quite some time. I know he has like a background in, I think he said, investigative journalism.
Yeah, so it sounds
And at
like he's
first
an
I was like,
investigative journalist, this is probably why he's
yeah,
done so much digging into historic stuff, because that's often what journalists do. But he
yeah,
may not be familiar with just how fast crypto moves, and therefore things that if you're going back 3 years, I mean, the company was just dramatically different 3 or 4 years ago, for example.
yeah. And look, at first I was like a bit pissed off, like, oh, what's this FUD? But then I realized it's actually good to do this
That's good.
exercise
It's due
because,
diligence is how I would look at it.
yeah,
I think it's just unfortunate that I wasn't around from the start to just be able to field this, because if people have made panic decisions related to trading, it's unfortunate for them. But that's fine. I don't mind fielding any of them. So yeah, I mean, they're all valid questions related to the clients, past history, any of it. So yeah, go ahead.
So I think where Legend's coming from is he's like, look, it's not a scam, it's not fraud. Like, you clearly have a product, but he finds your companies or some of the partnerships that you have. I'm just reading straight off the document here. Questionable. He says, I've been through 5 of them and they're
Yeah.
questionable. I have no idea about the rest, and I didn't check on the partners. The concern seems to be around creating an impression of greater success than is substantiated. While I've put in time researching this alongside my work, I acknowledge that minor errors might appear in the sentences. He gives a background. If anyone wants the document,
Yeah.
he gives a background as to what he does.
And so to answer that, I think you have to first ask, what have we actually put out? So what we've done is we've been quite careful to put out joint press releases with the clients where they have stated in their own words that obviously in every case so far they're white labeling the technology. We're not disclosing necessarily the commercial terms of the licensing in the press release, but they're then generally giving guidance on the size of issuance and the asset class that they're planning to prioritize, and in many cases the approximate timeline. So that's just factually what we're putting out. Now, I think by virtue of then covering the name of the client and with usually some covering information in the press release, that's just factually who they are. I would say that no one should be that wowed by real NOI or premier acquisitions, right? Because they're not companies you're ever going to have heard of before necessarily. So if you think about it, they're not a brand name like BlackRock. So if I was trying to wow people, we would be trying to pull in brand names, but we're simply going live with actual real clients that are paying and that have very proven track records in various industries. The fact that nobody's heard of them and therefore, for example, Legends doing some digging and going, well, who the bloody hell are these guys? Well, yeah, fair enough. I asked the same question when I first engaged with them too, because we've had our time wasted. I'm not going to name necessarily the client because they might still end up doing something with us. But let's just say about a year ago, I was very sure, based on a client steer, we were about to do an STO around about April, May last year. And they were absolutely assured they had the clients lined up, they had the businesses, they needed our infrastructure and wanted to utilize our Singapore licenses. And then at the last minute, they turned around and admitted they had no banking. They hadn't managed to crack the banking fear on-ramping problem. So we ended up with this test environment we built out for them live for months without them paying us a thing before. And that was a really hard learning lesson for us, where we realized we need to be very, very careful about these clients, because a lot of them are basically bullshitting us in cases where they say they've got the capability to deliver on their side and don't necessarily. So we've got very, very selective about picking, real companies, effectively answering, I guess, Legend's question, are these credible real companies or not? The answer is yes, because we don't generally now engage with anybody who's not serious. So we've started even doing things like throwing in initial fees. If they're not even prepared to pay a few grand, then it's a sign they're not serious on certain things like a test environment. And we're doing
I think
that.
Brainium was one he highlighted. He basically asked, when did you first get in business with them? What's their product and how does the partnership work? Greenium X.
Oh, Greenium. Yeah. So Greenium's an interesting company. They're a very small company, to be clear. They are they are run by he owns equity in Chintai as well, although I didn't know it at the time when they first approached us as well. Used to work for Brookfield Asset Management, a very smart guy who's headed up with a number of other finance people. They generally have plans to do a range of different green tech issuances, and so we are the tech solution for that. We've done the one pilot issuance with them to date. And we're to a large degree now waiting on them to actually utilize the VCC structure they have fully and push forwards, because we are effectively in the business of providing the tech. We're not in the business of generating the issuances for them in that regard, if you understand what I mean there.
How big was the issuance with them?
That particular one was a 5 million. It was very small. That was the one that Swiss Re actually came in and just picked up. And the reason is that it was issued at 40% discount to the market, the biochar credits. So it was a very quick test run for us. It was one of our first proper actual go live issuances. It was good though, because it revealed some internal things we still needed to get refined. And it meant that then when we hit the ground running later in the year, we were able to obviously service the likes of DNA and others far, far better with the quality of the product and the launch. But this is something to highlight. You know, if people are buying this token expecting a completely mature company, they're mistaken. And I would say the same really has to apply to Clearpool and most others. I mean, if anybody thinks Ondo are completely done and are not going to develop more, or Mantra, I mean, these are all new businesses building out the tech and infrastructure. And that's aside from the fact that RWA itself is already dramatically different than it was a year ago. Just the appetite, the size of the issuances, the types of things, the willingness of people to move forward. This is an extremely fast evolving industry. And so, you know, as a result, everything is moving very, very quickly. I've said internally to our team, for example, in fact, I do a end of year letter. And one of the things I said to them is, you need to put on your blue sky thinking about Chintai 2.0. And what I mean by that is the product that actually doesn't just meet the needs of clients now, but actually meets where we anticipate the RWA sector globally will need to be in sort of 2 to 3 years' time. And I think that will be quite different. And, you know, we could probably talk all day about what I think is going to be different and why. But let's just say these relatively crude portals where you interact and carry out the issuance process with set fields, I don't think it's going to be like that for much longer. I think it's going to get much more sophisticated and straight through and a bit more dynamic and more accessible then to people who aren't necessarily from a technical background as well.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah, so that was Granium. That was one of them. Obviously, from what it sounds like, it was a smaller one.
They're small, and yeah, so he's not wrong on that. But then that's not us misrepresenting. They are a small client. I remember saying it multiple times. Don't expect every client to be $500 million or whatever. They are going to vary in size. Some are going to be small, and some are much larger. So, you know, for example, like the art one that was mentioned, he may have not heard of them. They are a massive company in the fine art industry. They have been in the fine art industry for over 2 decades. Billions of dollars of art sales that they typically handle through the big auction houses. They have the portfolio. They have the massive network within. And it's an industry inherently very, very private. If you think about the fine art industry, it's an industry that keeps itself to itself quite specifically. And so, you know, the idea that you're going to just casually be able to pick up a lot about them, no, not really. Like I say, they are more than capable of executing on the deal size that we published out. And actually, it's going to be an ongoing thing, which is great news for, the network, for the token holders, just generally. The repeat business is really well.
How big was this? It was a couple $100 million, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. That's just their initial issuance, though. They are going to be using this ongoing. They're talking about billions because they've handled billions over the last 20, 30 years already. And for them, the opportunities really are tremendous on many levels. And that's not just to bypass the auction houses that absolutely fleece them, but also to actually become the auction house or instead to actually look at how you can collateralize fine art, which we're all familiar with regards to the tokenization potential there too. Same applies for whiskey and all sorts of other things too. But yeah, so it's a very interesting industry generally, but it's one that's quite hard to, I would say, research. So yeah, I mean, you can look up some things and ask questions around them, but I think to some degree there's a degree of wait and see. I mean, these deals in many cases have only really been announced in the last month. And then we've had Christmas and New Year in the middle. So being a bit realistic here, I don't know quite how fast people think that people are going to move over the Christmas period.
Yeah, 100%. How does tokenizing art actually work? Because I don't think that's been done before in many cases. So how does that look? If you're tokenizing like a painting or an artwork, and how does that benefit them?
Well, yeah, I'll explain. So actually most real estate and most art and most fine spirits, etc., where this is going at the moment, at least, is usually an SPV, a special purpose vehicle of some sort. Some structure is set up, and that is what is actually tokenized. An effective legal holdco for the assets is typically what is done. That doesn't always apply. Things like carbon, no. But in the majority of cases where it's a tangible real-world asset of that nature, it's generally easier. Now, the reason for real estate, for example, why that's the case is because they are effectively in a position where with real estate you need to reflect to the land deed registry, and that's a very hard thing to do. A company we've been working with in Australia, Bricklet, part of the Lakiba group for a while, have managed to do that, albeit on non-blockchain technology. These Bricklet units are about 50,000 Aussie dollars each, and it sold out well. It was Melbourne real estate. So it proves that eventually that will be where it goes. The blockchain becomes the source of truth for the land deed registry even as well. And maybe you've got the actual ownership side of the blockchain with certificates, and then you've got the liquid trading side that almost acts akin to a mortgage, where yes, I'm the legal owner, but I don't actually own my entire house. Other tokens are around in a lending market, right, where I can buy them back with super permissioning over time. Instead of needing a mortgage, it's a token market for funding of houses and house purchases, etc. So that, I think, will be eventually where it goes. But for the time being, it's tokenization of an SPV that typically holds a portfolio of appropriate real estate. And that's the industry evolving. It's just not ready yet for that level of sophistication.
And correct me if I'm wrong, if someone chooses to tokenize their assets, they have to pay in CHEX tokens to use the platform? Is that how the flywheel operates?
No, that's not correct. So let me explain how CHEX fits in with all of this. So we do not actually force the client to touch the CHEX token at all. The way it works is it's automated via the usage of the network itself. And so to give you an idea, a client might come on board and invest, and they would onboard, they fiat on-ramp a load of money, and they buy the real estate investment token on-chain through the account, through the white label instance. Now that is pushing transaction volume and usage of the network through blockchain transactions. That is akin to how Ethereum is used. Now, the fees that get charged to the client, they can be blended fees, partly on the network side, us, but also the client themselves, the issuer can charge them additional. So they pay a blended fee, and they're paying out in fiat. That gets converted via the smart contract into the CHEX Tokenomics, which in terms of what's going to be coming online, this is the dashboard that everyone will be able to see related to burn, issuance, buyback, yield. So a proportion of the network of those fees are converted, and we buy off the market, active, real time. We'll be deploying a very large CHEX AMM on Chintai Nexus, where that buy action will be taking place, and that's building up a community reserve pool initially. That will then feed into the state CHEX holder yield pool, which will effectively be driven by all the commercial activity across all the clients, whether they're white label or direct. All the actions, all the trading, whether it's the investor side or the issuer side, and don't forget issuance fees is the biggest single thing we're going to be making money on, at least over the first couple of years. That converts into the buy and the burn mechanics that we published out before as well. So it's designed to make CHEX a very good store of value, I would say, over time, as well as providing what we hope to provide is a very stable yield for holders as well, that weathers crypto winters in a way that yield doesn't generally elsewhere. And the reason for that is that it will be driven by a pool that probably underpays most, I would anticipate in the crypto boom times, and then overpays through crypto winters in terms of ensuring that stability where possible. And what we're doing at the moment and going to be doing over the next 6 to 12 months is really tweaking these parameters to get a healthy balance related to this. So we've said this before, it will eventually be fully encoded into the smart contracts, locked forever. And that's the same as the intent to also push the chain fully public over time as well. It's permissioned right now. Once we get to a more mature state, all of this is what takes place. But, that's something to be aware of with CHEX, that, it is not like certain other tokens that are operating exclusively on a public chain like, say, Solana or Ethereum. The smart contracts are at the moment being maintained on multiple blockchains at present, and that's the multi-chain nature of it. But we have to basically look after those contracts to the same level of security we are all other code as a regulated institution. So when we were applying for licenses, we went into great detail about checks with the Monetary Authority of Singapore, for example. So they are very aware of what the token is, how it fits in. They're happy with that, because we're not forcing clients to play around with it directly themselves. The fact that it has this impact regardless is fine by them, because it's a network token, effectively.
For the last 15 minutes, just cognizant of time, I just want to touch on three of the other projects. So we've talked about Greenium, we've talked about Premier Art. The Premier Art seems to me like more details will probably come out in Q1, because it's something that's been recently announced.
Well, not just that. We have a load of other client announcements coming out this month. So not that I can tell you what they are. That would be a bit too exclusive, Miles. But rest assured, we have more coming as well over the next month.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Like, the way I see this, I just said it in the Discord channel, is like, you're still relatively nascent in the scheme of the lifespan of the business. And RWA itself probably is only just gaining traction now, with Trump coming in and, with all the interest that's built over the last year with BlackRock. So it's like, I think only now are these companies open to the idea of tokenizing. So it does make sense why, you've started with, to me, smaller companies first, getting the platform.
They're the ones that
right,
have been willing to move. No, I mean, I'll give you an example. Is that, I think a few people know, BlackRock asked me to come in and meet them in New York about a year ago now. And at the same time, we were already talking to Vanguard, but Vanguard had such a problem internally. They had a whole team desperate to get on and do things with tokenization and Bitcoin and all sorts of things like that. And they basically said, we can't. Right up at the top, we are completely constrained. And that was the outgoing CEO who was he was the same guy who decided, even though Vanguard's the only asset manager the same size as BlackRock, roughly, we're going to pass on the Bitcoin ETFs because it's a scam, or whatever they claimed. So they ended up missing the biggest asset class ETF launch ever and made themselves look like idiots, quite honestly. So now the good news is, though, that the likes of, there's been a change of leadership there. There's a new willingness for an absolute giant in the industry to start stepping up and actually doing some things in this space. So, I see all of this as exactly what you're saying, which is a lot has changed even in a year from there, where I had a BlackRock that was interested in doing things but didn't really have a strategy, to Vanguard completely constrained, to Goldman not really telling anyone what they were up to various things launching and announcing. But generally, if you think of it like this, landing an investment bank as a client is a big deal. And we have actually got one that's not announced, although it's not huge. It's a boutique one. But that's the sort of early adopters we're going to be able to pick up as a full tech stack provider for digital assets. And then, in theory, as you scale up and your ability to service client and deal flow and things like customer service, right? I mean, that type of thing requires hires, maturing of the handling of issue tickets. This is business growing pains that you can kind of expect to go hand in hand with these things. Those are the types of steps that we have over the next 6 months, which then enable us to actually go to these bigger companies and say, not only do we have this plethora of high quality issuances and clients that are smaller, we've even got another bank, albeit a smaller one here. Why don't you consider us? And it's just so much easier to be taken seriously in that environment than it is as a relative unknown startup saying, we've got this great solution. We want you to be our guinea pig and sort of effectively deploy this to you. Most large companies are just not interested in taking risks like that.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Darcy says in the channel, I've recently noticed a lot of people on X expressing concerns about the web pages of the companies onboarding with Chintai. I think Legend specifically mentioned realnoi.io. He said he wanted to the website.
CACH2, I think, was another one you mentioned, no?
Yeah, and CACH2. I guess
I'm still not sure whether to call them CACH2 or CACH2, but anyway. Yeah, I mean, so those guys, for example, because we didn't really touch on them, they are extremely experienced, but this is a company they've set up. They have a massive portfolio of real estate, huge in Manhattan, like billions of dollars in size. And so for them, they come up with an incredibly interesting concept, which is the tokenization of the actual rental yields as an income derived. So it's a derivative, basically, token that they're going to be issuing. I think it's fantastic. I think that we've had interest from a variety of both Asian and other funds that want to potentially list this, who are also using us as a tech provider. These are unannounced.
The question he asked about them is this a legitimate B2B partnership, or is this through a personal connection? So
yeah, I only met them for the first time in Puerto Rico just before Christmas. No, these are not through any network or anything like that. They are not, virtually everybody has just approached us, usually on the basis of becoming aware of us, and they start shopping around the various solutions and trying to find one that best meets their needs. And so far, at least, we aren't losing business to anybody else, because generally the white label model, the comprehensiveness of what we have, and the additional access to these high quality licenses if needed is a pretty powerful combination. Now, not to say that I'm sure we have lost business out there, but we seem to be pretty competitive so far. So no, I don't know them personally beyond that. Met them in Puerto Rico. They're actually very geeky, but very impressive people. And on the DNZ one, because I remember that one was also one.
He said he couldn't find any information on it.
Yeah, well, DNZ is a pretty large company in Singapore. We don't share an address with them. I'm not sure where he's got that from. They have their own offices. We're the ones that use the relatively cheaper ones on Robinson Road. It's just the shared spaces, because we don't need a big office there ourselves. Most of the team work remotely anyway, and they're global. But DNZ were all set to go ahead earlier this year, and unfortunately their founder and CEO died of cancer. He was 62.
Very sad.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I actually had got to know him over a period of working with him as we started to prepare on the launch. So I knew him before the diagnosis, and it was very aggressive and quick, unfortunately. So very sad. But yeah, that really knocked the team in terms of. I guess it would be analogous to if I just snuff it suddenly. I'd imagine the team would of course recover, but you lose a certain level of leadership and direction, and that's what's delayed them on that side. They've taken some time to try and find and bring in other senior management, regroup, and they are the interesting thing is they've seen the go live with several of the carbon related things that we're planning, and they've seen the product live. So it's really accelerated their enthusiasm to now push ahead and get on. So they're definitely still active. But these are the types of things that, we don't really announce this stuff, because I don't feel it's my place to sort of go, hey, everybody, hey, CHEX holders, this guy just died. It's like, it doesn't feel appropriate as a client. But I mention it now because the questions there around them. But generally that's sort of what happens across the board. Delaying factors do kick in. These people are running their own businesses. They're trying to solve problems just like we have been. And issuing RWA does encounter legal issues. It can entity setups. There's a variety of things off chain which can delay the process longer than people anticipate. So that's also why we're trying to not give precise dates on when various things necessarily go live, because we're not sure exactly when the clients are. The beauty of what we have as a SaaS model, though, is it's incredibly low cost every client we're onboarding, especially where it's fully fits within our functionality. So it's going to become a very, in theory, good margin business that scales extremely fast as well. And we're noticing that with just the pace we're able to now pick up clients. Yeah, and that's why I think I've mentioned that, we are targeting getting about 50 live before we open a Series A for that reason. To me, if you'd asked me 2 years ago,
How quickly do you think you can do that?
Well, I mean, we're going to be going live this month with another 3 or 4. So it's starting to ramp up now. The problem we've got is we're having to really focus now on hiring because the tech team in Germany are absolutely, well, it's mainly Europe, not just Germany, but they're absolutely, overwhelmed and need more support. We're figuring out certain things that are needed. We've now just sorted out a partner on the custody side that we'll be announcing shortly. That's a really great partnership for us there. But, we were looking at initially going for a custody license and have decided maybe that one actually we should put back because it's a lot of overhead to try and do all that internally when we've got so much else on. So, yeah, there's a lot going on internally. And that's kind of why, like I say, I've been busy with stuff like that, not fielding random questions from some account on X. But that's why I wanted to come in, though. Just make sure you guys have got some answers from me. And just to know, now I'm on here. If anyone wants to find me I don't know if you could do DMs, but if you want to ask me questions on that channel, I'll keep an eye on it and I'm happy to field them.
Yeah, maybe, you can pop in every now and then and answer questions. Yeah. That'd be great. I think one that we still haven't touched on is real NOI. This is one that, he said was one of the most interesting ones.
It definitely is.
I'll just kind of summarize the questions. How's the business operating? It seems to lack staff. Can't find any evidence of deals made. And second question, since the listings are only accessible to investors, you cannot register as one contrary. I don't exactly get the grammar on that sentence. Basically, he's questioning the $120 million in listings they claim to have. He's wondering how that can be proved. Those are the two questions on that one.
I think it speaks to a bigger question, which the whole community understandably wants, which is visibility on the blockchain. So we actually are working on that right now. I had a meeting, was it early today? Either yesterday or this morning. Effectively where I gave them the list of all the core information that we need to be able to provide, not just, the issuer themselves, but in theory, other groups, with regards to visibility of the chain. Where we've got a bit of a quandary right now is, in one sense, there are some major benefits for a degree of privacy around real world assets. I mean, as an example, if you think about your bank account, no one else can see your private transaction history on that and your credit cards. And would you be entirely comfortable with other people able to snoop and say, "Oh, Miles, I see you just spent this much on a new watch. That's a bit, ostentatious of you, blah, blah, blah. Why don't you put it into Bitcoin?" You should be able to buy that watch with a degree of privacy, right? And so I'm kind of torn because I love the transparency of blockchains too. But if we open the Blockchain Explorer fully up, you can bet it's going to be people snooping around everything on it, gradually identifying who the hell owns a given account. And then from there, they've got their entire, audit transaction history of everything that they're essentially doing in real time. So I've got mixed feelings about that one as to whether or not we want to provide some sort of layer where you can see all your own assets and you can see the wider metrics of the network, but not necessarily just go in and start looking at other account levels, or whether we just open the whole thing up, which is maybe the more crypto, libertarian way to look at this.
Maybe there's a middle ground. Maybe instead of going fully transparent, you just can provide a bit more details on, because some of the announcements are vague, and maybe that's because of, as you said,
they have to be,
also trying to protect them.
To some degree, that's because the clients, these are joint releases with the clients, and so in many cases, we wanted to push them to commit to a launch date, where the precise details of the deal flow, and in many cases they're doing the right thing, which is saying we'll give you the figures that we're going to be doing, but we'd rather not put pressure on ourselves on a specific date yet, and we'll do a follow-up release ourselves when we're ready. I think they're making the right decision in such cases. With regards to these guys, though, I mean they're planning to launch a completely new site and portal in tandem with the launch of the actual product side. I've seen the history with regards to this, but I think there has to be a degree of realism here about what level of transparency you're ever going to necessarily get from any company regarding commercial deal flows and so on and so forth. Because I mean, look, even on the New York Stock Exchange, do you guys remember the Nikola scandal, right, where they had this hydrogen-powered truck that they were talking about. And they had all these deals being announced with partnerships with GM and all these other things. But actually, when you dug under the surface, all the investors had to, a large degree, you had to take that at face value. And to spot fraud of that nature is very difficult. So, I would say that really applies for every single company in the RWA space, is either you're going to invest based upon understanding the team, their fundamentals, their track record, their history, are they, regulated and licensed or not, etc. And there has to be some degree of trust in that interim period between an announcement and then seeing if it goes live. And of course, if things don't go live, well, great, it torches their reputation and you quickly realize that they're full of shit, right? So, it's not going to be very long at all in the coming weeks and months where we're going to have more issuances being announced, like I mentioned this month, more clients, various other partnerships and things going on that are really exciting. Can't wait to get some of that live and announced. But yeah, at that point, people are going to see this stuff online. And more importantly, with the CHEX Tokenomics coming online, that's fueled by all of this too. So I don't think most CHEX holders actually understand what the CHEX Tokenomics is going to mean for the token yet. But
maybe that's something I can dive into later.
Absolutely,
That's really interesting.
It's going to be quite marked, that's for sure.
Last question, because I know you have to go. Yeah. Could you just explain what Cello is? That's, I think, probably the project we've touched on the least.
Cello.
Cello? Real NOI by Cello. Cello's I believe the Cello Services International AG owns Real NOI, which is the business you did.
Well,
deal with.
Let me see if I can pull it up. Let me just see if I can find what you're talking about. Do you say CELLO?
Yes. No, SELO. Real NOI. Josh also mentioned this in the chat. Former investment bankers for strategic relationships with real estate.
Josh would have been the ideal to have on here because, so just to be clear, they are very much one of the North American team's clients. I've not had huge amounts of overlap with the specifics of them, so that's probably not.
Maybe I can just get Josh to pop a.
Yeah,
Josh can maybe just pop a quick message on pertaining to that one.
He definitely can. Yeah, he will be able to give an answer on that one. So maybe if that's all right with you, we'll let him answer that one on the Discord.
Sure. Look, and if there's any follow-up questions, people can drop stuff in the chat. I mean, I don't want to sit too much of a witch hunt, so to speak, but it is.
My rambling didn't get too boring about the history of the company, but I just thought it was useful so you all understand sort of the journey we've been on, which has been half a decade or more now to get to this point. It's actually kind of wild. I almost look at it as kind of like surfing a wave, right? You just go and see where it starts to go, and some waves run out, and ours has just kept going and is really reached a point now, I think, where the momentum is just incredible. The whole sector, everything's aligned so well for us as an industry now. You've got, like you mentioned, Trump coming in as well. You've got Bitcoin reserves being built up. You've got the largest institutions in the world going, we're all in on tokenization. Everything's going to be tokenized. That is such a fucking huge pie. It's insane in terms of its potential for us as an industry, I think, collectively.
It's massive, yeah.
Yeah, that's why I think there's some other tremendous companies in the space too. I really like the Clearpool guys, for example. I think what they're doing is great. So, yeah, for me.
My biggest positions in RWA, which is currently CHEX and Clearpool, I like both of you because I see the scalability a little bit more tangibly than other projects, just based on valuation versus like token value accrual, which is why I've kind of bet on you guys versus some of the others, which are great, like Maple.
Well, some of the valuations are astronomical, especially if you look at the diluted token value, right? That's actually one of my biggest pet peeves, apart from inflation on tokens, is these vesting cliffs. I actually can't stand that. I've never understood why so many people in our industry feel it's a PvP game. It literally, in other words, I get rich at the direct expense of others, because you can create value. Collectively, you can get the network effects of a community working together to make a success of things. And that's what the CHEX community does. And for us, they're very powerful for us on many levels.
One question a lot of people are asking about, and then I'll let you go. Maybe Josh might be the better person to speak about this with, but everyone wants more centralized exchanges because it's still difficult to access the token. And of course, that'll mean your announcements hit a bit harder, right? Because when someone sees an announcement on X and they go on to Bybit, it's way easier to just buy versus
Well, I'll say this.
versus Vexy or
Nobody
something.
would give us, from the larger CEXs, no one would give us the time of day, say, a year ago. But obviously a lot's changed
Yeah.
in that time. We've broken the top 200 consistently. The volume's organic and not faked and is doing well enough that they're... So what's interesting...
And maybe that's part of the problem, right? Because a lot of projects are faking their volume.
Possibly so, play the game. But no, that actually hasn't mattered. And so most of the largest exchanges have now actually approached us to start opening conversations, is all I'll say. And obviously you have to work through with them. But what's quite encouraging about it is that none of them are asking to charge us for listings, which is quite refreshing given what you hear about in the past. And frankly, we're fully distributed, so we can't just give them 10% of the token supply, right? It's just not there to give. So yeah, all I'll say is I'm expecting some hopefully very positive news in the coming months. Based on how discussions are going with certain parties. That's all I can say.
And for me, that's one of the big, catalysts yet to come for the project, which is good.
Yeah, that as well as just generally, I think getting the CHEX Tokenomics portal fully live and sorting this bridge issue out. Right now, CHEX is one way on it. It's ridiculous. So apologies for that. The team would have had it live and fixed last month, but we were so busy with DNA. And then I didn't want them, screwed over the Christmas period either. So it's partly on me in terms of why it's now been pushed into this month. But we're on it.
Well, thanks for joining, David. I think it says a lot about your character and your intentions as well by being here. That's one of the things I said in the chat. Like if CHEX was some fraudulent scam, I don't think his PR team would be telling him to come on an AMA and actually address questions directly.